My brother owes the IRS $400,000, my father said, sliding a manila envelope across the kitchen island like it was a dinner menu. You're going to fix this before it ruins us. I looked at him, then at my brother slouched against the fridge scrolling his phone like none of this concerned him, and I said, "No, I'm not." 3 days later my father texted me one line, "You'll regret this for the rest of your life." I read it standing in a parking garage in downtown Charlotte, and I typed back 4 words. I already don't. My name is Madison. I'm 31 and I work as a senior compliance officer at a regional bank holding company headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you've ever been the responsible one in a family that punished you for it, stick around, because what happened over the next 6 weeks is the most satisfying thing I've ever lived through. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I grew up in a house in Myers Park that looked like it belonged on a postcard. White columns, a circular driveway, azaleas my mother fussed over every spring like they were her real children. From the street, the Whitfield family looked like something out of a regional magazine spread. Inside, the math was simpler and uglier than anyone outside ever knew. There was my younger brother Tanner, who could do no wrong, and there was me, who could do no right unless I was fixing something he'd broken. It had been like that since we were kids. I got a B+ in 10th grade chemistry and my mother sighed like I'd disappointed the whole family lineage. Tanner failed his junior year of college twice, and my parents threw him a fresh start dinner at the country club. I worked 2 jobs through undergrad at UNC Charlotte and paid my own way through a master's in finance at night while holding down a full-time analyst position. Tanner took 11 years to finish a 4-year degree, funded entirely by my parents, and somewhere in there started a consulting business that, as far as I could ever tell, consisted of him buying expensive watches and calling them networking investments. I should have known something was wrong the second my mother called and asked me to come to dinner on a Tuesday. We didn't do Tuesday dinners. Tuesday dinners meant something had happened that required damage control, and damage control in my family always had my name attached to it. I drove out after work still in my blazer, my badge clipped to my blouse because I hadn't bothered to take it off. The house smelled like garlic and tension the moment I walked in. My mother Carol, no, not Carol, my mother's name was Eleanor, was setting the table with the good china which in our family was never a celebration signal. It was a softening tactic. You don't bring out the Wedgwood unless you're about to ask someone to bleed for you. My father, Richard Whitfield, was standing at the head of the table with his arms crossed, already wearing the expression he used right before delivering verdicts. Tanner was at the table, 28 years old, wearing a quarter-zip that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, looking everywhere except at me. "Sit down, Madison," my father said. "Not hello, not how was work. Just sit down like I was a witness called to the stand in a trial I didn't know I was part of." I sat. My mother slid the envelope toward me before I'd even gotten my coat off the back of the chair. "Open it," she said. Inside was a letter from the IRS, a notice of federal tax lien, and behind that a stack of unfiled returns going back 4 years. I'm a compliance officer. I read documents like this for a living. It took me about 90 seconds to understand exactly how bad it was. Tanner hadn't just neglected to pay. He'd filed fraudulent business expense deductions for 3 straight years, claimed a home office that didn't exist, and run nearly $200,000 of personal spending through an LLC he'd registered under our father's address without telling him. The penalties and interest alone had ballooned the original liability into something just north of $400,000. "This is a federal lien," I said slowly, looking up. "Tanner, did you know about this?" "I was going to handle it," Tanner muttered, finally looking at me, then immediately looking away again. "Stuff got complicated, I repeated. "That's not the point right now," my father cut in. "The point is the IRS is one step away from seizing assets. Your mother and I co-signed on his business line of credit 2 years ago. If this lien attaches the way the letter says it can, they can come after our house. Do you understand what that means?" 40 years, Madison. 40 years we've lived in that house. I understand exactly what it means, I said. I work in compliance at a bank. I read tax liens for a living. What I don't understand is what you think I'm supposed to do about it tonight at this table with a casserole. My mother's hand came down flat on the table, the chai rattling. "You're going to pay it. That's what you're going to do about it." The room went very quiet. I actually laughed, which I think surprised all 3 of them. Because it clearly wasn't the laugh they were braced for. You want me to pay $400,000, I said. For a debt your son created by committing tax fraud. Don't say it like that, my father snapped. He made some mistakes. You're the one with the savings, the one with the fancy promotion last year. You always made sure you were the responsible one, didn't you? Well, this is what being responsible looks like. It's not just about you anymore. It has never been just about me, I said. That's the entire problem. I have spent my whole life being the backstop for choices I didn't make. If you don't help him, my mother said, her voice shaking now, somewhere between grief and threat, we lose the house. Do you want to see us lose the house? Do you want to watch your father, at 63 years old, packing up 40 years of memories because you decided to be stubborn about money you don't even need? I looked at Tanner. He still hadn't said a word in his own defense. He was looking down at his plate like the tablecloth held some kind of answer. Tanner, I said, say something, anything. He shrugged. I mean, you make good money, Mad. It's not that deep for you. That was the sentence. That was the exact moment something in me that had been fraying quietly for 31 years simply came apart, cleanly, like a seam giving way all at once instead of one thread at a time. It's not that deep for me, I repeated. I have student loans I'm still paying off because nobody funded my education. I have a 401k I built from nothing because nobody is leaving me a safety net. And you think $400,000 for fraud you committed isn't that deep? Watch your tone, my father said. I am done watching anything, I said, and I stood up. I am not paying a federal tax debt that exists because a brother lied to the IRS for 3 years. I am not co-signing anything. I am not putting my name anywhere near this. If the IRS comes after this house, that is a conversation between you, Tanner, and the IRS. It was never my signature on that line of credit. If you walk out that door, my mother said, standing too, her voice climbing, do not bother coming back for Christmas. Do not bother coming back at all. We will tell everyone exactly what kind of daughter abandons her family over money. I looked at her, then at my father, then at my brother, who still hadn't met my eyes once. Then I won't be back, I said. Good night. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel, which surprised me. I think some part of me had been waiting for that exact moment for 15 years, and now that it was here, there was nothing left to feel except a strange, cold clarity. I didn't cry. I made a list. The first call I made the next morning was to my attorney, a woman named Priya I'd worked with on a regulatory matter 2 years earlier and trusted completely. I told her everything: the lien, the co-signed line of credit, the LLC registered under my father's address without his knowledge, all of it. She was quiet for a moment and then said the words that became the spine of everything that followed. Madison, if your name isn't on the lien and isn't on the loan documents, you have zero legal exposure here. Zero. The only leverage they have over you is emotional. That sentence rearranged something in my head. For 31 years I had operated as though my family's financial mess was structurally connected to me, as though the walls of that house in Myers Park were somehow load-bearing for my own life. They weren't. They never had been. I had just been told they were, over and over, until I believed it. The second call I made was to my own bank, where I quietly moved my emergency fund and investment accounts to a new institution, not because I thought my parents could touch them, but because I wanted a clean line drawn, a place where nothing of theirs could ever reach in, even hypothetically. The third call was to a forensic accountant my firm sometimes used for fraud reviews, a methodical, soft-spoken man named Walter who agreed, off the clock, to look over the documents I'd photographed at dinner before I left. What Walter found over the next 4 days turned what I thought was a family financial crisis into something much larger. The LLC, registered as Whitfield Strategic Consulting, had been opened using my father's home address and, more troubling, what looked like a notarized signature authorizing Tanner as a managing member with banking authority. A signature my father swore, when I finally showed him the document weeks later. He had never given. Someone had forged it, or someone at the notary's office had been paid to look the other way. Walter also found that Tanner had taken out 2 business credit lines using projected revenue figures from clients that, according to public business registries, did not exist. Not struggling clients. Not former clients. Companies that had never been incorporated anywhere in the state of North Carolina. This wasn't financial carelessness. This was a paper trail of manufactured fraud, and my father's name and signature, real or forged, were sitting directly in the middle of it. I sat with that information for one night before I made a decision that I knew would change everything permanently. I called my father. I need you to come to my office tomorrow, I said. Alone, not Tanner, not Mom, just you. There's something you need to see, and I need you to see it before the IRS does. He came. I'll give him that. He showed up at 9 the next morning in a suit he probably hadn't needed in years, looking smaller than I remembered him looking at that dinner table, like the suit was doing more work than he was. I laid the documents out on the conference table in the small office I'd booked, the same way my mother had laid that envelope in front of me a week earlier, except I wasn't asking him to fix anything. I was showing him the truth. Tanner forged your signature on this LLC authorization, I said. Or paid someone to. Either way, your name is on financial documents tied to fraudulent revenue claims used to secure 2 business lines of credit. You didn't just co-sign a struggling business. You may have unknowingly become a party to bank fraud. My father went very still. I watched the color leave his face in real time, watched 30 years of unconditional belief in his son crack open right there under fluorescent conference room lighting. That's not possible, he said, but his voice had no convictions left in it. I had a forensic accountant verify it, I said. I can walk you through every page. Dad, if the IRS investigation widens, which it will, because liens of this size automatically get flagged for review, this stops being a tax problem. It becomes a criminal referral. And if your signature is on fraudulent loan documents, even forged, you need a criminal defense attorney before you need anything else, because right now you are exposed in a way you don't understand. He sat down slowly, the fight gone out of him entirely. Your mother is going to lose her mind. My mother already told me not to come back for Christmas, I said. So I think she'll survive learning her son forged your name on federal loan paperwork. I want to be honest about something, because this isn't a story where I felt triumphant in that moment. I felt sick. I felt the particular grief of watching a parent realize too late that the child they protected at every cost had also been willing to sacrifice them. But I also felt something else underneath it, something steadier, relief maybe, that I was no longer the only person in that family seeing clearly. I gave my father the name of a defense attorney I trusted, a man named Gregory Aldridge who specialized in financial fraud cases, and I told him that was the only help I was offering. Not money, not my name on any document, information and a direction to walk in. What happened over the following weeks unfolded mostly without me, though I heard pieces of it secondhand, then eventually directly because my father started calling me again, quietly, almost guiltily, like someone reaching out from underneath the wreckage of something he'd built himself. The IRS investigation widened exactly as I expected it would. A revenue agent flagged the LLC's business credit applications for review, cross-referenced the listed clients against state registries and found nothing. That triggered a referral to the bank's internal fraud unit, since 2 business credit lines had been issued based on falsified revenue documentation. The bank, naturally, wanted their money back and wanted it fast, and they had far less patience for sob stories than my parents had ever had for mine. Tanner was interviewed first. According to what my father told me later, my brother tried, almost unbelievably, to tell the investigators that I had helped him set up the LLC. A lie so reckless and so easily disproven by my own employment records and email timestamps that it nearly became its own separate problem for him. My attorney Priya fielded one call from an investigator confirming my non-involvement, which took approximately 11 minutes and ended with the investigator apologizing for the inconvenience. My father, to his credit, didn't lie. He told the investigators the truth, that he'd never authorized the LLC banking access, that he believed his signature had been forged, that he'd been kept deliberately in the dark about the scope of what Tanner was doing. It cost him. There was a period of weeks where he was treated as a potential co-conspirator, simply by virtue of his name being on the documents, and Gregory Aldridge earned every dollar of his retainer, walking my father through depositions and document reviews. That my father admitted to me once were the most frightening weeks of his life. Tanner was not so fortunate. The forgery, once confirmed by a handwriting analyst the bank's fraud unit brought in, became the centerpiece of a case that moved from a federal tax matter into something with actual criminal exposure. Bank fraud, identity-related forgery, and false statements on a credit application. I won't pretend I know every legal detail of what came after, because I deliberately kept myself one step removed from it once I'd done what I needed to do. What I know is that Tanner hired a defense attorney of his own, a less expensive one, and that the conversation in that family shifted, almost overnight, from Tanner is having some cash flow issues to Tanner needs a lawyer who handles federal cases. The house in Myers Park did not get seized in the end, though it came close. My father, once he understood the actual shape of what was happening, moved fast, hired Gregory, cooperated fully, and negotiated a settlement with the bank that involved selling a rental property he and my mother had owned outright in Asheville for nearly 2 decades. It wasn't the house with the columns and the azaleas, but it was something they'd built, something they loved, sold in a rush transaction at well under market value because they needed liquidity immediately and didn't have the luxury of patience. My mother called me exactly once during all of this, about 5 weeks after that dinner. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did in a strange way, because I think I needed to hear what she actually had to say, even though I already knew it wouldn't be an apology. "This is your fault too, you know," she said, her voice flat in a way I'd never heard from her before. "If you'd just helped him like a normal daughter would have, none of this would have come out. None of this would have happened." I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the small backyard of the townhouse I'd bought entirely on my own 2 years earlier, and I felt, for the first time in my life, completely unmoved by her. "Mom," I said, "Tanner forged Dad's signature on federal loan documents. That happened whether I helped him or not. The only thing that changed is that now you know." She didn't have an answer for that, she hung up instead. The criminal case against Tanner moved slower than the civil and tax matters, the way these things tend to. By early spring he'd accepted a plea agreement, restitution, a period of probation, and a felony record that, regardless of how light the sentencing ultimately was, would follow him through every background check for the rest of his life. He lost the consulting business, obviously. He lost the apartment he'd been renting in South End, that none of us, in retrospect, had ever quite understood how he afforded. He moved back in with my parents, which I think was its own kind of sentence. My father reached out to me again in late spring, almost a year to the day after that dinner with the Wedgwood china. He asked if I would meet him for coffee. Just the two of us, somewhere neutral. I almost said no. I thought about it for 2 full days before I said yes. We met at a small place in Dilworth, not far from where I'd grown up but far enough that it didn't feel like Myers Park territory. He looked older than he had a year earlier, not just tired, changed, in a way that I think only happens when someone is forced to actually look at themselves instead of the story they've been telling about themselves for decades. "I owe you an apology," he said, before I'd even finished sitting down. "Not for the dinner, for every year before the dinner. I spent 30 years deciding who in this family deserved protecting, and I got it wrong every single time. I protected the child who lied to me and let the one who never lied carry the weight of it." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Some apologies you wait your whole life for, and when they finally come, you discover they don't undo anything, they just exist now, alongside everything that happened before them. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally said. "I'm not going to pretend it fixes anything, but I appreciate it." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking it to fix anything, I just needed you to hear it from me, not from your mother, not secondhand. I was wrong, Madison, about all of it. We talk now, my father and I, maybe once every few weeks. It's careful, the way conversations are when you're rebuilding something on a foundation that cracked badly enough to be visible forever. My mother and I are not where my father and I are, and I've made my peace with the possibility that we may never get there." Tanner reached out once, months after his sentencing, with a text that read simply, "I'm sorry, Mad." I didn't respond. Some apologies arrive at exactly the moment you're finally ready to stop waiting for them, and that one arrived about 3 years too late for me to know what to do with it. I still live in that townhouse in South End, the one I bought with money nobody handed me. I got promoted again this past winter, to Director of Compliance, the kind of title that 15-year-old me, sitting at that dining room table being quietly told she wasn't enough, would not have believed was coming. I spend my holidays now with the people I actually chose. My closest friend from grad school and her husband, my downstairs neighbor, who became something closer to family than half the people I'm related to, a small, loud, unglamorous Thanksgiving table with mismatched chairs and exactly zero good china. Last month, almost on a whim, I set up a small scholarship fund through my alma mater for first-generation finance students working full-time jobs while finishing their degrees. The kind of student I used to be, the kind nobody throws a dinner for when they succeed. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't need them to know. I had spent so many years being the responsible one for people who never once thanked me for it. It felt good, finally, to be responsible for something that was entirely quietly mine.